Today we're going to be taking a look at the Ryobi RY40207 Brushless 40 volt cordless trimmer. So let's get started. At the back of the trimmer we have the 40 volt brushless motor as well as the battery slot. Moving forward we have the grip as well as the trigger. The trigger has the built-in safety to prevent the trimmer from accidentally starting. And in front of the trigger there is the high and low setting switch. Moving further up we have the angled handle as well as the attachment point. And at the front of the trimmer we have the trimmer guard as well as the trimmer head. On the trimmer guard we have the line cutoff blade. It can be adjusted from 13 to 15 inches by unscrewing the two screws and flipping it around. Now here are some videos of the trimmer in action. Let's talk a little bit about this trimmer. The first thing I noticed while using this trimmer is that it is definitely heavier than both the 18 volt brushless version and the 40 volt brushed version. And while it's not really a surprise that it's heavier than an 18 volt version, I was surprised that it was heavier than the brushed 40 volt version. I think generally when people think of brushless they think of smaller, more powerful. But I think Ryobi opted to go for a bigger motor which would give you more power rather than a smaller motor that would give you the same amount of power as the brushed version but with a longer runtime. Overall the weight isn't bad. However, I will say that the 40 volt brush model has a better distribution in between the front and back, making it a little bit easier to carry. It is still way better than a gas trimmer on the back end. Design wise, the only thing I really don't like about it is the fact that the high and low selector switch is not recessed. Because it's not recessed, it makes it very easy to bump forward or backwards, especially if you're working in a tighter area. While it isn't that big of a deal, it is annoying and it can lead to jams if you're working in thicker weeds and you accidentally bump it to low. Power-wise, this is the most powerful of the 3 attachment-capable trimmers from Ryobi that I've tested so far. This can be a good thing and a bad thing. Let me explain. When I first started using this trimmer, I was really enjoying the extra power that the brushless 40 volt motor was providing. However, as the morning went on, I was discovering that I was burning through my weed whacking line way faster than what I was with the previous 40 volt brushed model. This has to do with the fact that the brushless model is spinning the head faster than what the brushed model is capable of. Now, that normally wouldn't be that big of a deal because this model has a high and low selector switch. However, I don't feel like that the low setting provides enough power to get through some of the average weeds that you'd have to deal with if you live in a more rural area. Honestly, I wish this trimmer had a high, medium, and low selection switch, not just the high and low that it comes with. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed the extra power this trimmer provides, but you're going to burn through your line faster and you're going to deplete your batteries quicker if you use this on high constantly. And like I said, the low just doesn't seem to be able to provide enough power in a lot of situations. So if they had added a medium setting, I think that would have been a very good balance for this model. But they didn't, so we have to deal with what we're given. Or complain about it until they change it in the next model. Now let's talk about the battery life. I'm not exactly sure why, but I could not get a consistent runtime out of the trimmer like I could with the brushed 40 volt model. I went ahead and did some testing with the batteries, and I didn't really find any issues with them. So I'm thinking that it has something to do with the trimmer. My trimming times were anywhere in between 15 minutes all the way up to 35 minutes, and I'm not sure why that would be. If the difference was smaller, I wouldn't think it would be that big of a deal, but that's a pretty big difference in runtime. Whether or not this has to do with the higher speed that the head is able to rotate and the brushless motor, or if it has to do with the weeds I was trimming, I'm not sure. I just could not get a consistent runtime like I was able to with the 40 volt brush model. Please keep in mind that this was using the high mode and not the low mode. You'll get a longer runtime if you use the low mode, but I think most people will be using this on the high mode most of the time, unless you're just doing some light trimming along a sidewalk and you're just dealing with grass. Honestly, the only time I ever really use the low mode is when I'm working along, say, a chain link fence and I don't want the line to grab the fence. I'm sure the low mode has its uses for like the blower attachment or the brush attachment. I just don't use it a whole lot myself. Now let's talk about how well this trimmer can cut through weeds and grass. For these videos, I just used what was included in the box with the trimmer. In the future, I'm going to be switching over to a third-party manufacturer of line because honestly, they do a better job than what Ryobi does. Honestly, that's something I never really understood. Why do manufacturers include cheap line or cheap blades or cheap bits with their products? You would think that they would want to include something of a higher quality to lessen the chance that the item will be returned to the store when the cheap accessory breaks and the person gets upset and returns it to the store. Not to mention protecting their brand name. But then again, it is a Ryobi. But enough of that little complaint. Performance-wise, the trimmer did as well as the brushed 40-volt version did. The more powerful brushless motor is definitely a nice feature to have, and it'll come into handy when you're using different attachments. However, when you're trimming weeds, I'm not so sure that it's that big of a difference, especially with the size of line that this trimmer takes. The 0.8 diameter line that this trimmer takes just isn't robust enough to be able to handle those speeds and come in contact with objects. So instead of the line wearing down like it should, the line will break, leaving large sections, meaning that you'll be burning through your line faster and you'll be leaving more trash around your yard. This can probably be remedied by switching to a different manufacturer of trimmer line. Like I said, the trimmer line I was using was a Ryobi trimmer line. And just like with the brushed 40-volt model, the only two weeds I really had issue with were vineweed and tumbleweeds, as usual. So let's move on to the pros and cons of this trimmer. And just for fun, I added a third category, the meh category, for those things that are just meh. And the first pro is easy to replace line. If you need help replacing the line, I will include a clip at the end of the video to show you how. And the second pro is lightweight. This is way lighter than one of those gas-powered anchors, trimmers. And the third pro is great reach. This comes in handy for when you need to get underneath vehicles and trees or other things that you don't necessarily want to crawl underneath. And the fourth pro is attachment capable. Being able to put on a variety of different attachments to be able to finish all those jobs that you need to do that you've been putting off. And putting off, and putting off, and putting off, and putting off. And the fifth pro is the 40-volt battery. This comes in handy for getting those jobs done more effectively than say an 18-volt battery. And it's still cheaper than a 56 or 80-volt battery. And pro number 6, brushless. You'll have an increased amount of torque per watt, increased reliability, and reduced operational noise. And it has the word brushless written on the body so you can let everybody know you paid more for that tool. And coming in first in the meh category, we have runtime. The runtime of this trimmer was not very consistent, and I'm not sure why that is. The batteries I was using were providing consistent running times in other tools, so I don't believe it was the batteries. If I had to hazard a guess, I'd have to say it probably has to do with how big the motor is and how much power that it requires in order to get that head spinning as fast as it can go. In the end, the runtime wasn't the worst, but it definitely wasn't the best either. Wait. Yes, I said that it was lightweight compared to a gas trimmer. However, if you compare this to the 40-volt brushed trimmer, I feel like that the 40-volt brushed model has a better weight distribution between the front and back ends. Con number 1, soft plastic. I know I've said this before, but Ryobi just doesn't always use the best quality plastics in their tools, and so it would be nice if they used a little bit higher grade plastic. Overall, it really doesn't affect the performance of the tool. It would just be a nice thing to have. No sling point. I know I'm beginning to sound a little bit like a broken record on this point, but there is no sling point. And it would have been nice if Ryobi had included one in the box to begin with. It comes in handy when you're carrying two tools at once or if you're older. You can buy third-party manufactured sling points, but it would be nice if it had been included. No medium setting. I think this trimmer would have greatly benefited from having a medium setting, not just the high and low. The high setting is great, but you go through your battery a little bit too fast and it'll destroy your trimmer line quicker. And the low setting just doesn't always have enough power. Yes, it has a variable speed trigger and you can use it on the high setting and not pull the trigger in all the way, but at the same time it would have been a lot easier if there had been a medium setting included from the get-go. And that is it for the pros and cons. At the end of the day, it is a good trimmer and it does get the job done and it does a good job. I just don't know if it's that much better than the brushed 40-volt version. I think the 40-volt brushed version will be more useful if you're primarily doing grass and weed trimming. I think where this version comes into its own right is where you need to start using the attachments on a more regular basis. I think the higher speeds that the brushless version will be able to generate will be more handy for when you're using, say, the pole saw or the brush cutter attachment, or even the hedge trimmer. And at the end of the day, it's still better, more advanced, and easier than using any of these.
I want to show you how easy it is to replace the trimmer line in this trimmer, and how to reassemble the head if you take it apart. Now the first thing I do when I'm reassembling the trimmer is I place the spring onto the upper head housing. It should just stay in place. Next I grab the lower string housing and the bump knob. And then I place the bump knob inside the lower string housing, and then you line up the two arrows on the bump knob and on the lower string housing so that they're facing each other. It's a little hard to tell in the video about the arrows, so I included this picture to show you what I'm talking about. Next you're going to grab the spool and place it on top of the bump knob and inside the lower string housing. When placing the spool inside the lower string housing, you want to make sure that the grooves on the spool will feed into the ridges on top of the bump knob and that it goes all the way down, otherwise you will not be able to reattach the lower string housing to the upper string housing. Once you have everything seated, line up the two arrows on the upper string housing and on the lower string housing and push them together, and then twist into the locking position. Next I double check to make sure everything looks like it's properly aligned. Next you'll want to make sure that the arrows on the bump head and on the lower string housing are facing each other. Next, grab your trimmer line. You can buy pre-cut lengths or you can cut your own length. The length should be about 10 feet. Once you have your trimmer line, go ahead and feed it through the hole until it comes out on the other side. You'll want to make sure that there's an even amount of trimmer line on both sides of the trimmer head. Once you have an even amount on both sides, go ahead and start winding the bump knob, and it should start pulling the line into the trimmer. Make sure you stop before the trimmer line is completely pulled into the head. I usually leave about 6 inches of line on either side of the head. And that is how you replace the line in this trimmer.